In the last 7 days alone, 98 earthquakes of magnitude 4.5 or greater were recorded around the planet. Colombia is still digging out from a magnitude 7.4 that killed dozens of people. Indonesia just got hit by a magnitude 7.7 5 days later. Spain's Granada province has been rattled by a genuine seismic sequence all through August. Alaska felt a 5.6. If you scroll back through this year alone, you'll find a magnitude 7.8 in the Philippines back in June. There were 2 massive earthquakes in Venezuela in the same month. There was a 7.3 in Mexico in July. Different countries, different continents, different oceans, all within the span of a few months. So the question a lot of people are genuinely asking right now is completely understandable. What is actually happening to the planet? I want to give you the honest, complete answer to that question because it involves real data that makes 2026 genuinely stand out. It also involves a specific scientific explanation for why a cluster like this doesn't mean what the scariest version of this headline implies. Stick with me to the end, because I'll walk you through exactly how seismologists distinguish a genuinely unusual global pattern from ordinary background noise that just happens to be getting more attention this year than usual. And if you want to be here for the next major seismic event anywhere on the planet, subscribe to Nymora Proof before we get into it. Let me start by taking this year's earthquake seriously, one at a time, because I don't want to rush past the real scale of what's actually happened in 2026 before getting to the explanation. On June 7th, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the Philippines. On June 24th, Venezuela was hit by 2 powerful earthquakes in quick succession, magnitude 7.2 and magnitude 7.5. The event ultimately killed more than 6,000 people, making it one of the deadliest earthquakes anywhere in the world this year. Mexico recorded a magnitude 7.3 in July. Then, on August 10th, Colombia was struck by a magnitude 7.4 earthquake near San Jose del Palmar in the Choco region. The earthquake killed dozens and collapsed buildings across multiple cities, including Cali and Pereira. It prompted the country's president to suspend national sporting events and declare a period of national mourning. Just 5 days later, on August 15th, Indonesia's Flores region was struck by a magnitude 7.7 earthquake. It triggered a tsunami warning across 4 provinces. Running alongside all of that, Spain's Granada province has experienced its own seismic sequence throughout August, with several earthquakes above magnitude 4 and numerous smaller aftershocks. This has been closely monitored by Spain's National Geographic Institute across the Iberian Peninsula and the Canary Islands, validating the perception. That's a genuinely striking list. I want to be clear that the perception this year has been exceptional, has a real factual basis. It's not manufactured hype. Indonesia, Japan, Tonga, and Vanuatu have all experienced strong seismic activity throughout 2026 as well, adding to an already unusually active year. So the first honest thing I want to tell you is this. You're not imagining it. You're not being fed an exaggerated pattern. 2026 has genuinely produced an unusual concentration of large magnitude earthquakes across multiple continents. Now here's where I want to walk you through the actual science, because understanding why this is happening and why it doesn't mean what the scariest interpretation implies requires understanding a few things about how our planet actually works and how we as humans have started measuring it. The first and most important concept is this. Earthquakes happening in Colombia, Indonesia, Spain, Japan, and Alaska are not happening on the same fault system. They are not mechanically connected to each other in any way that current science supports. The Earth's crust is broken into more than a dozen major tectonic plates and dozens of smaller ones, constantly grinding against, colliding with, and sliding past one another across the entire planet. Colombia's earthquake occurred where the Nazca Plate is subducting beneath the North Andes. This is an entirely separate physical process from Indonesia's earthquake, which occurred along a completely different subduction zone thousands of miles away in the Pacific Ring of Fire. Spain's Granada seismic sequence is tied to yet another distinct tectonic boundary, where the African and Eurasian plates interact beneath the Iberian Peninsula. These are not dominoes lined up to knock each other over. They're independent physical systems that happen to be releasing stress within a similar window of time, purely by chance. Given enough independent events happening constantly around the world, it's entirely possible for several of them to cluster together within any given month or season. Here's the statistical reality that I think genuinely helps put this in perspective. It comes directly from the same data driving this year's headlines. On average, the Earth produces roughly 15 to 20 earthquakes of magnitude 7.0 or greater every single year. It also produces well over 1 million smaller earthquakes overall, the vast majority too small to be felt by anyone at all. That means a magnitude 7+ earthquake happening somewhere on the planet, on average, isn't a rare event at all. It's something that happens roughly every 2 to 3 weeks somewhere in the world in an ordinary year. What makes 2026 feel different isn't necessarily that the total number of major earthquakes is wildly outside historical norms. It's that several of this year's events have struck in unusually visible, high-consequence locations, near major population centers, with genuinely devastating human tolls. They occurred close enough together in time to feel like an escalating pattern, when they're actually independent events on independent fault systems. I also want to address something directly, because I think it's exactly the kind of nuance that gets lost in a headline built around the phrase, "What is happening?" A recent analysis specifically covering this exact question concluded plainly that the succession of earthquakes in 2026 may be extraordinary from a human and media perspective. But it is not, by itself, evidence that the Earth is entering some kind of new era of seismic activity. The planet continues to release the energy accumulated by its tectonic plates the same way it has for millions of years, entirely unrelated to any given calendar year's news cycle. The genuine difference in 2026 isn't the underlying geology. It's our ability to detect, measure, and share information about these events, virtually in real time, across a globally connected media and social media ecosystem that simply didn't exist even 15 or 20 years ago. Let me walk through that detection and awareness point in more detail, because I think it's genuinely one of the most underappreciated parts of this entire story. Modern seismic monitoring networks are dramatically more sensitive and more comprehensive than they were even a couple of decades ago. The USGS alone locates and catalogs tens of thousands of earthquakes globally every single year. This includes huge numbers of small and moderate events that, in an earlier era, might never have been recorded at all, let alone reported on. Combine that improved detection capability with the instant global reach of social media, where footage of a collapsing building in Pereira or a tsunami warning siren in Flores can reach millions of people within minutes of the event happening. You get a genuinely different information environment than existed during past active earthquake years. The earthquakes themselves aren't necessarily more frequent in some unprecedented planet-wide sense. Our collective awareness of every single one of them, no matter how far away, has increased dramatically. That said, I don't want to lean so hard into the reassuring framing that I dismiss something genuinely worth understanding. Certain specific regions really have had an unusually active year. That's worth acknowledging, honestly, rather than glossing over with a blanket, "It's all just noise" explanation. Venezuela's twin earthquakes in June were genuinely among the deadliest seismic events anywhere in the world this year. Colombia's earthquake, striking a region that hadn't seen anything close to that magnitude since 1938, caught infrastructure and preparedness genuinely off guard, specifically because of how long it had been since the last comparable event there. Indonesia sits on the Ring of Fire and experiences frequent significant seismic activity as a simple, permanent feature of its geography. A magnitude 7.7 striking just 5 days after a major Colombian earthquake, even on a completely separate fault system on the other side of the world, is exactly the kind of timing that makes a genuinely unrelated coincidence feel like an escalating global pattern. Let me also address Spain specifically, because a seismic sequence in Granada is a genuinely less common story for most people to have on their radar compared to Ring of Fire nations like Indonesia or Colombia. Spain does experience regular, low-level seismic activity, particularly across the southern and southeastern regions, near the boundary between the African and Eurasian plates. A sustained sequence involving multiple earthquakes above magnitude 4 within a single month is a genuinely notable event for that specific region. It's exactly the kind of local story that, layered on top of an already earthquake-heavy global news cycle, contributes to the broader sense that seismic activity is spiking everywhere at once, even though Spain's sequence and Colombia's earthquake share no mechanical connection whatsoever. So here's the honest, complete answer to the question in this video's title. What is happening is this. The Earth is doing what it always does, continuously redistributing the stress that builds up along tectonic plate boundaries across the entire globe, at a long-term average rate that hasn't fundamentally changed. What's different about how 2026 is felt is a combination of genuine regional bad luck and several unusually significant high-casualty events happening to strike populated areas within a compressed window of months. It's also a media and monitoring environment that surfaces every single one of them to a global audience within minutes in a way that simply wasn't possible in past decades. Both of those things can be true simultaneously. 2026 has genuinely been an unusually newsworthy year for major earthquakes. There's no scientific evidence that the underlying planet has somehow become more geologically active, or that these events are triggering one another across separate fault systems and separate continents. I want to give you the specific reasoning seismologists use to rule out that kind of cross-continental triggering, because I think it's genuinely useful. It's the same reasoning I've walked you through before on this channel regarding other earthquake clusters. The stress change caused by one fault slipping falls off extremely rapidly with distance, roughly as the cube of that distance. This means a major earthquake's ability to meaningfully influence stress on a completely different fault thousands of miles away on a different continent is essentially negligible under standard seismological understanding. Some limited, transient stress transfer from very large earthquakes, generally magnitude 7 and above, has been documented at genuinely long distances. That effect requires a receiving fault that's already sitting right at the edge of failure on its own. It's a documented, narrow phenomenon, not a general mechanism explaining why Colombia, Indonesia, Spain, Japan, and Alaska would all suddenly become more active together within the same calendar year. Let me bring this all together, because I think the complete, honest version of this story is both more scientifically accurate and, frankly, more useful for anyone trying to actually understand what's happening, rather than just reacting to a scary-sounding headline. 2026 has genuinely produced a real, significant cluster of major earthquakes. The Philippines in June, Venezuela's devastating twin quakes later that same month, Mexico in July, Colombia, and then Indonesia in August, alongside an active seismic sequence in Spain and continued activity across Japan, Tonga, and Vanuatu. That's a real substantial list. The human toll behind several of these events, particularly Venezuela and Colombia, has been genuinely severe and deserves to be taken seriously on its own terms. What the evidence does not support is the idea that these events are connected to one another, that the planet has entered some new, more dangerous seismic era, or that this specific concentration of earthquakes predicts anything about what's coming next anywhere else on the globe. Each of these earthquakes occurred on its own distinct fault system, driven by the same permanent, ongoing tectonic processes that have shaped this planet for millions of years. Their clustering within a single calendar year reflects genuine regional bad luck and a modern information environment that surfaces every major event globally within minutes, rather than evidence of any new, accelerating global pattern. I think it's genuinely more useful than either panic or dismissal. If you live in any seismically active region, anywhere in the world, the standing, sensible earthquake preparedness advice remains exactly what it's always been, entirely independent of how many earthquakes happen to make headlines elsewhere on the planet this year. Know how to drop, cover, and hold on. Secure heavy furniture that could topple during strong shaking. Have a basic emergency kit ready. That advice doesn't become more or less relevant based on how many unrelated earthquakes struck other countries this particular year. It's relevant because you live somewhere with real permanent seismic hazard, the same hazard that existed last year and the year before that, independent of this year's specific news cycle. Before you go, I want to ask you something, because I think this story captures a genuinely interesting pattern in how people process global news in an era of instant connected information. Does seeing multiple major earthquakes from different countries, all in your feed within the same few weeks, make you feel like something has genuinely changed about the planet? Or does understanding the real statistics, that a magnitude 7+ earthquake happens somewhere on Earth roughly every 2 to 3 weeks in an ordinary year, change how you read a headline like this one? Drop a comment and tell me honestly. I think that tension between how connected our awareness has become and how unconnected the actual geology remains is exactly the kind of nuance worth understanding, especially in a year that's genuinely felt as active as this one has. If this gave you a clearer, more accurate picture of what's actually happening instead of just the alarming version of the headline, hit that like button. It genuinely helps careful, well-sourced breakdowns like this one reach people instead of coverage that treats every earthquake cluster as evidence of some new, escalating global pattern. Subscribe to need more proof, so you're here for the next major seismic event anywhere on the planet. I'll keep giving you the real geology, the real statistics, and the real context every single time. Drop your thoughts in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one.